Okay, we are live. Nikko Kennedy, welcome to the Terrain Theory Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Nikko, let's start by defining applied quantum biology in contrast to traditional biology, biomedical science.
Great. So in applied quantum biology, the word applied is that we are taking what's happening in the academic world and putting it into work right now with real practitioners out there who are serving real patients, real clients. So we're making changes happen right now that are referencing what's happening in the world of academic quantum biology, but in the field.
So you are literally the bridge.
Yes.
Okay, so the applied part, let's take out. That makes sense. Quantum biology. Let's talk about that and define that for us.
Great. Well, biology is the study of life. Quantum began with the world of quantum physics, then kind of expanded into quantum chemistry. We know that all life depends on chemistry, and all chemistry is happening by the flow of actually subatomic particles, especially electrons, right? The interactions between electrons and protons, and the way that different atoms arrange themselves into molecules into life, right? Through tissues, through organs. So all of that we're finding as research develops that there are quantum physics things that we used to think of as just happening in the lab, in the experiment, that are actually happening in the real messy world of biology. So in a quick way, you could say quantum biology is the intersection of quantum physics and biology, but it really encompasses all the sciences. It's an interdisciplinary study.
And in what way? Give us an example of some of the ways that the quantum is impacting like our biology, our bodies, our health.
Sure. So everyone knows that life requires water, right? Water is a polar molecule. One side is slightly positively charged, the other side is slightly negatively charged. And when looking at water, which all life depends on, the hydrogen bonds that give water its cool properties of being sticky and being the universal solvent and all of that, it turns out that at a mathematical level, you need quantum functions to be able to describe accurately the hydrogen bond. So as just one example, but likewise, we're finding all kinds of things that we have classical physics, which is thinking of everything as a continuum. Quantum physics is trying to get down to what are the discrete particles, the discrete moments, what are the smallest units. And so at a theoretical level, it's about the type of math function that's done. And so certain things like the hydrogen bond, we can actually predict better how it works in real life when using a quantum mathematical model versus a classical model at the math, right? Just to make what we see happening in the real world be able to make sense and be able to predict it. To be able to predict it is also leading to being able to influence it and control it.
Right. I suppose that would make it easier to conduct studies as well, right? Predictability is an important aspect of conducting like repeatable studies.
Yes.
Yeah, and then okay, so let's carry this further then. How then would this directly apply to our health? Like let's look at water, for example, right? What
Mm-hmm.
are we, because this is the application part.
Right.
What are you learning in the quantum biology space that is impacting how practitioners work with, say, clients around H2O, around the water in their bodies?
Right. So we know, so you can look at studies of people who, you can, like we have tests to say, like, how dehydrated is a person? How dehydrated are their tissues? And then we try to do studies with hydration saying, like, we're going to quantify all of the water. So all the water that a person drinks, all the sweat, all of the excrement, we're going to try to quantify that. But then we find that we can't find a specific amount of water that is a universal, because two different people in the same environment, water in, water out, doesn't actually correlate to the hydration markers of that person. So in our field, we're looking at different research into the properties of water. And one of the big things is that in the quantum view, the body doesn't have waste products. So you hear about like reactive oxygen species, when you hear about the electron transport chain inside of mitochondria that are giving us energy. In in older models, ATP was everything, but the cells also create water. So the water that is created inside of the cell is potentially one of the reasons that we can't accurately predict in a water in, water out model the actual hydration of tissues, right? Because if the water body is able to create its own water out of raw materials, out of raw oxygen, hydrogen, and energy, right, then that's a way to explain this phenomena that we all know, that you can't just say, oh, you need to drink 8 glasses of water a day and then you'll be hydrated, because we know in the real world that doesn't actually work. It doesn't actually make cells more hydrated in every case, right?
Yeah, how recently is how recent is this discovery that the body is basically its own water producing machine?
Oh, we've known it for a very, very long time. It's just that in the past, the water was described as a byproduct, whereas now we're saying that's one of the essential functions of mitochondria.
Yeah, and it's interesting, this observation and now belief that the body doesn't produce waste. This seems to fly in the face of the health space and detoxification and the production of waste within the body and the lymphatic system, which carries the waste. Can you dive in a little bit to what you mean by that?
Sure. So life is self organizing and it is connected to its environment. In my view, we could almost describe humans as organelles on the cell that is planet Earth. So, what humans produce as waste, the environment can use to create more life in another system, right? So when you're thinking of everything as a connected whole, and that's one of the really interesting things about what quantum science does, is it's not only looking at the smallest of particles. We are looking at the smallest of particles, but if you're looking at the smallest of particles, that means that you're also looking at the cosmic interactions that our planet is going through. Like the Earth in its essential form, you look at it, we have the Earth, which has a net negative charge. Cells in our body also have a net negative charge, right? But then we have the ionosphere. The ionosphere has a net positive charge and is constantly being bombarded by cosmic rays. Most of them are coming from the sun, but it's also coming from more distant stars and things happening in space, that we get proton storms, we get all of this energy that's collected in the ionosphere. Lightning is a channel between the ionosphere and the Earth, right? Those fields are constantly involved with biology. So when you're looking at quantum, which is the subatomic particles, a lot of the work in quantum is about energy and understanding the flow of energy, which ultimately is coming from space to the planet and then proliferating and differentiating and being of interest. Right? Life is very interesting, and you can see a huge diversity of life forms. So in academic quantum biology, we're looking at animals, birds, plants, microbes, right? We're looking at all kinds of different things and finding quantum effects happening there, quantum energy effects, particularly anything involving the flow of electrons, which is photosynthesis. Right? We kind of talked about mitochondrial respiration a little bit, right? All of these things are happening. So when you look at the quantum scale, it's like a bridge between the very smallest of things, subatomic particles, and the very largest of things, stellar energy transfer.
Yeah, I like that. I think that there's a danger for folks who are looking at the quantum space and thinking that the folks working in the quantum space are just getting so narrow and focused on the very small and going smaller and smaller and smaller.
Mm-hmm.
What you're doing is clarifying that you're doing it within the context of better understanding the macro, and that you're seeing the similarities between what happens on the micro and what happens in the macro. And I appreciate that. I think that that just helps to better understand that you guys keep the bigger picture. You're keeping the larger and bigger picture always in mind. Back to the waste thing, I really also enjoy that reframe, that it's like one man's trash is another man's treasure, right? One organelle's trash is another organelle's treasure. Still, to that organelle, to the organism that is the human, that thing is, we can define it as waste, but because we're not going to separate ourselves from the context of nature and the world in which we live, that does serve a function elsewhere, right? In life.
Yeah, that's great. And as another example of that waste, we look at reactive oxygen species, because that is something. ROS is a huge talking point. You'll see a lot of people talking about redox and ROS. And so I work at the Institute of Applied Quantum Biology, helping all kinds of practitioners understand how this applies to their specific work. In my own practice, I work with families, I work with moms, especially through pregnancy and early childhood. And one of the first, like the very main, biggest by volume cause of babies getting separated by their moms from their moms for a medical reason is to go for jaundice phototherapy. And one of the things that has plagued the phototherapy realm is that for some reason, some babies, we have the bilirubin is considered a toxic waste. And so I've done extensive research into bilirubin, and it's actually a really important signaling molecule. So a lot of like at the molecule level, things that we think of as waste, like bilirubin, communicate information between one part of the body and the other. So when that bilirubin gets conjugated and goes into the digestive system to be eliminated, it's what makes baby poop yellow. Some of that gets taken back up. And so that frustrated scientists looking at this, because they wanted to get all of the bilirubin out because they see it as a waste product. But it turns out that the process, when the body reuptakes the bilirubin out of the intestines, it releases a huge amount of electrons, and it acts as a massive antioxidant. So now what they've found is that when babies are reuptaking the bilirubin from their intestines, those babies have oxidative stress. So then suddenly you're seeing that the body is being wise, and it's using this waste product to generate energy, that the body can then use to heal from the stress that it's under. So then you can see that perhaps supporting that baby's oxidative stress might be a better approach than attacking and trying to get all of the bilirubin out. There are some places in the world where they actually use wet cupping to remove some of the baby's blood. They're like, well, there's too much bilirubin, so we're just literally going to take it out through their skin. And it's effective for reducing the jaundice, but it does nothing for the oxidative stress that's happening, that's making the baby reuptake the bilirubin in the first place. So one very detailed example from my field, but we have this all over the place with our practitioners. We have surgeons, we have fitness people, we have chiropractors, massage therapists, we have, therapists doing mental health work all over the body. We find these kinds of reframes where things that we've thought of as waste processes, or things that we just haven't understood very well, why our treatments aren't really working and why we haven't been able to prevent certain conditions. Actually, quantum biology offers tools that are very, very effective for getting into those situations.
How did you first get into this field?
So it happened through circadian biology. Well, I think all of us who grew up, I grew up in the woods. You can see I'm out here. So nature has always been a supportive force in my life. And it's always made sense to me that nature would best support life, because that's that's the default state, right? However, when I wanted to become a doctor, I went to school, and in that process, I was going to school and I was working, and it had a huge amount of circadian disruption in my life. I didn't realize it, but I learned about circadian biology, and I started taking on my light environment and fixing the things that work for circadian health. And eventually I realized that work that fit into my mission, and that circadian health is extremely important for mothers and babies. And so I was serving mothers and babies and realized the circadian disruption was leading to a lot of the negative outcomes we were seeing, and a lot of the negative outcomes that we wanted to prevent. So I dove deep into circadian biology. And when you really start working in circadian biology, you start having these outsized effects. People having newfound vitality, profound transformations that can't be explained by circadian biology alone. So from circadian biology, going deeper, you end up in quantum biology, because light is having effects not only on our circadian clock genes and oscillators, but also on all of the cells and tissues. Light penetrates all the way through the body. So it's like reaching into the bone marrow and changing the way that blood cells are made, depending on what kind of light we are under. So it's partially happening through the circadian rhythm, but it's also happening through these other quantum effects. So that was my channel in, was that I loved nature. Circadian disruption floored my health, not autoimmune, but severe immune system stuff. Fixing circadian biology corrected all of that. I started teaching it to others. They started having wild outsized effects, and I had to understand more about what's going on. So going through, there are other people in the academic world that are having a similar journey. There's actually a paper that's something like from chronobiology to quantum biology, because there's a very clear path that when you start looking at the light and how the light programs a circadian rhythm, that when you get the light right to program the circadian rhythm properly, you end up having all these other benefits because of the other qualities of good light.
Wild. Is Jack Kruse someone you pay attention to?
My husband discovered Jack Kruse's work when I was pregnant we were pregnant. I was pregnant, and so he was like, hey, this is going to seem really weird, but I'm following this doctor online. And so I'm going to be doing this thing, which is turning off all the breakers to our house every single night. So we had no power. And candlelit, all through the pregnancy, which was awesome. My birth for that baby was very circadian. Went into labor in the morning, labored across the day, had an accidental unassisted birth. That evening, very, very smooth, uncomplicated. After the baby came, he called the midwife and was like, okay, like the baby's here. And so she came and checked us all out and got us tucked into bed. And now that I've learned more about all of how this works, I understand more about why circadian health is so important, not only for the health, but also for the specific cascade of labor. So Jack Kruse definitely was who introduced us to the content, the idea of blocking artificial light and electromagnetic frequencies at light. But the whole scope of it, there are so many people working in this field. It's like he's one in a sea, right? Like he's getting his information from people who are working in academia, and all of that source material is also available.
Yeah, wild. I know he would advocate for doing brain surgery outdoors if he had his druthers away from artificial light. Would you say people should be giving birth outdoors?
Definitely laboring outdoors. And inside of my Substack, I've written a lot of articles and a bunch of classes about the impacts of light and things. So I absolutely utilize the outdoors in labor. And there's a lot of ancient art that's also showing that. And if you think about labor and the way we used to live before we had glass that blocked UV and that was very thermal, homes were much more permeable to those frequencies. So yeah, the light outside totally transforms the hormonal profile and helps deal with pain, and then likewise for the healing process.
Yeah, it sounds like you're taking a scientific approach in making a case for non-interventionist ideas, right? Like you're backing it up with science, but you're saying nothing happens by accident. The body is brilliant. I can prove it scientifically, but getting back to basics is kind of the heart of your message, it sounds like.
Yeah, it is definitely getting back to basics. It's definitely getting to a very fundamental layer of our existence, a very primordial layer. A lot of the things that are good for us at the quantum scale are also what's good for plants, what's good for, our pets, what's, in all these different ways. And there's a lot of people in the quantum space who are working hard on the technology. So the baseline is nature. Nature is the gold standard because that's how everything naturally works, right? Like nature is naturally quantum. technology introduces new factors. And so I really respect the people who are working in the technology space, because they are the ones who will make it possible to bridge modern, amazing powers that we've created and health understanding at the quantum scale. Because you can look at things like recently, they were able to actually put probes inside of cells to photograph quantum tunneling, which is incredible because a lot of the quantum theories are based, like I said earlier, on math models, but we haven't had the equipment to be able to look inside of living cells. So that was profound, and is one of the things that kind of technology will accelerate how we can understand and be able to measure the impacts of electromagnetic frequencies that are man-made, that are coming in, not in the way that when things come from nature, they're usually connected to a whole spread of frequencies, whereas when they come in from our devices, they're coming in very narrow bands of frequencies. So you can see what that looks like. Like if you look at the like a visible graph of the different frequencies of light coming off of a fluorescent light bulb, you can see that it's a very jagged kind of shape. Whereas if you look at the frequencies coming off of the sun, it's a very much more rounded shape. And so light frequencies and what we think of as like EMFs, which are coming off of technology, are in the same spectrum. And a lot of people don't realize that. They think that there's a different quality, but the difference in quality is that our eyes can't perceive those other frequencies, right? So similarly, space sends all kinds of frequencies. Our planet is sending up all kinds of frequencies. It's just a matter of which ones our bodies are attuned to and what kind of things they're expecting and what amount. Similarly, like the difference between eating an apple and having a spoonful of fructose, that's the same amount of sugar technically as is in the apple. If you just got that apple off of a tree, you know that that's going to have a very different impact on your biology. So similar with the EMFs and the light frequencies, when we have these very isolated bands without the full connection that it usually would have, that's where we see different kinds of effects that we're only just beginning to measure, but they start to explain some of the outcomes that we see in chronic health conditions.
Wild. I have one more question, then I'll hand it back to Ben. What about getting back to water? Is structured water and the work of Gerald Pollack and those types of researchers part of your research?
Yes. One of our faculty members in particular, Carrie Bennett, she spoke at Gerald Pollack's water conference recently, and she's connecting with him. He is doing very lab-based work. So Carrie is very familiar, and if you wanted to go deeper onto his work, I would definitely recommend anyone reach out and connect with her, because she's taking all of that and reading it and adding her own lens. And he's starting to become more receptive to some of the ideas that we're bringing, because we're very interdisciplinary, whereas he's very focused. So yeah, I would connect with her about that if that's something you're interested in, because she would have a lot more to say.
Great. Thank you.
I want to go back to the tech. You sound like an advocate for technology, and I wonder, is it technology that augments what we would already get from nature, or is it technology that plugs the holes that exist because of our inevitable separation from nature, the inevitable separation due to just society and the way that we have to live in buildings and homes and so on?
What I'm talking about are basically the mitigation and amelioration. we need technology that harmonizes with our biology. And at present, a lot of the technology does not harmonize well with our biology, and it has detrimental effects. Circadian disruption being the easiest starting point, and where we recommend a lot. I loved the interview you did recently. I'm also in Southern Oregon, so you're going to know what interview you're talking about, with the gentleman who has the dark retreat.
Yeah.
And I love that. You asked him a question that was fabulous, which is there a minimum effective dose of darkness? So in a similar sense, we talk a lot about light and how to like deal with technology and all of that. But another big piece of our work is also related to restoring darkness, natural darkness. So I really appreciated his, and I wanted to jump in and give an answer there of like, is there a minimum effective dose of darkness? And I loved what he said of like, can you put an eye mask on for 5 minutes out of your day? If you can't sit there for 5 minutes in the dark, then why would you want to go to a dark retreat and spend days in the dark, right? So darkness as a therapeutic is amazing, and has huge potential in the mental health space. They're currently using it for manic episodes in schizophrenia and bipolar and getting people out of the hospital much, much, much faster. And so their threshold is 14 hours of darkness. 14 hours of darkness is a therapeutic dose that most people rarely get, and especially when you look at people in the polar climates. So when thinking about darkness, right, there's the way that you would get that naturally is, like I said, living in a polar climate. The way that you would get that technologically, if you live in a city, would be blackout curtains, right?
Yeah.
So nature, when technology is helpful, it is often getting closer to replacing nature, right? Not that it is doing better than nature. It's reintroducing natural experiences, which right now a lot of us live in a way that's very isolated from the normal natural experiences that we would get. Does that
And that
kind of
no,
answer?
that's
I know it was kind of a tangent, but
no, amazing, and thank you for tying it back to that the dark retreats and the sky cave retreats. That minimum effective dose, I think he answered through the lens of the mental, emotional, spiritual. You are doing it more from that physical or quantum, and how it impacts our circadian rhythm, or maybe resets the circadian rhythm, and therefore like the cascade of hormones that might happen that then obviously have the impact on every part of our body. Right? Yeah.
Mhm.
That's so fascinating. And most of us, I would say, I mean, you go into a hotel room, one of the first things I try to do is like block all the light. You got a clock, you've got the red light on the TV that's just sitting there on standby mode, and you've got to go, spend 10 minutes just
Mhm.
to get all the light out of that room. And I would say that most homes are can be similar. Even if you're in a rural environment, you've got the neighbor's lights, you've got some light trickling in, and
Mhm.
you're advocating for, like, at sleep time, absolute dark, right? Put on a mask, put on blackout curtains, make sure you don't have like a little light on the plugged in, whatever it is in that
Mhm.
room, right? That's really important.
Yeah, one of the things people don't realize with regard to their nighttime lighting is that when we get lit up by the lights, it comes in through the nerves. And so it's an instantaneous firing of the SCN and triggering cortisol and daytime things happening. But when we go the other direction to wind down, that's a process that happens through the endocrine system. So a lot of molecules can be both a neurotransmitter and a hormone. It just depends. The neurotransmitter is in that synapse and it's released here, fires, and immediately connects with the next nerve. It's very instantaneous. Whereas to move through the blood, it can take 2 or 3 hours for the blood system to flow and get that melatonin circulating at the level that's needed for nighttime autophagy and sleep processes. So, with pregnant women that I work with, they're often like the first sign, like first trimester, what's the first thing that happens? She starts having to wake up to go pee in the middle of the night all the time. So she'll say, like, well, I had 10 hours in bed. I should be feeling great. Why do I still feel like crap? Well, if she's getting up to go pee and doesn't know about the lights, she flips on the light and then that triggers through the nerve synapse. So, in one flicker of light, one opening of the fridge puts your body into daytime mode that then takes 2 to 3 hours to wind down from. So if you get up 2 or 3 times at night, that's potentially that every time your body starts to get into melatonin mode, it's then triggered back into the daytime. So then you've lost the entire night of autophagy, even if you've technically slept. And
Yeah.
that's the state that a lot of people are in, where they think that's so like the minimum like maintenance dose of like general darkness is like 10 hours, right? A therapeutic dose is 14 hours, but 10 hours in darkness gives you 2 hours to wind down into it, right? So that's why you hear people saying like 2 hours before bedtime, you need to start dimming your lights
Mhm.
so that you can actually be having the full regenerative processes at night so that you can wake up feeling great. Yeah.
Would you
For
advocate for those like red light at evening time?
Ideally, you're working with the entire environment. When you get the entire environment in sync, then that benefits everyone inside of it. So again, like I'm coming from the perspective, like I have 5 children at home. We have a baby, 2-year-old, 4-year-old, right? We're not buying all of these glasses and telling 2-year-olds and babies to wear glasses. And also there are receptors in the skin that are sensitive to light as well as the eyes. However, the glasses are effective and there's a lot of studies, especially like I said, for those mental health crises. There's really good research using the red light glasses for schizophrenic and bipolar disorder. So they are effective, but to me, they're not the gold standard. The gold standard is the entire environment being tuned, and there's really amazing work being done to get in whole communities tuned. So there are sea turtle lighting ordinances that are something you can look at. That's really cool that they're doing because the baby sea turtles need to go towards the ocean. So the moon over the ocean needs to be the brightest thing in that environment for them to make it to the ocean. Otherwise, they end up in the city getting run over. No one wants to see baby sea turtles dead in the roads. It's horrible. So they do that. There are also dark sky initiatives to try to preserve our view of the night sky constellations. One of the things that happens, and this is where I also think that anyone listening to this should also listen to the dark retreat episode that you did, is that humans get kind of scared of the dark and we're pushing the darkness away. That's the major cause. Like in the US, it's estimated that 99% of people are getting disruptive levels of nighttime light pollution. So it can be scary. And that's one of the first elements of pushback, that when you get a whole community to where you could walk outside at night and not have any disruption from streetlights. They have warm, low shielded. So everything's looking amber. It looks like there's coals like on the floor, right? So people can feel scared in that kind of environment. And you have to give your body enough time to adjust to it. But our eyes are so amazing that we can actually see better in those environments. So there's often the argument that we need bright light because it detracts crime. And makes things safer. But really, when our eyes are constricted, it makes the shadows deeper. So a good circadian light environment, you can still see well enough to get around at night. But it's also allowing melatonin to flow, allowing the biology. Like if you think of if we did have firelight still, right? At first, you have a big roaring fire and there's a lot of yellows and everything. And then as it goes down for the evening, it gets dimmer and dimmer and redder and lower to the ground. So that's kind of like what the nighttime light environment should be doing. So that to me is the gold standard. But blue blocking glasses are a great way to experience it when you can't control the whole environment. Yeah, they can be effective.
Yeah, and beyond glasses, I know some people who just like cast red lights into their living room at night at a certain time. Their house is just bathed in red light. Is that something you would recommend?
Right. So we're mimicking nature, right? So in the daytime, we have overhead bright, right? But we don't start in the middle of the day. We start at sunrise. So at sunrise, what I do, because I live in a climate that shifts. So the window really shifts. So sometimes I'm waking up before dawn. So what do? The first thing, I have strip lights around the floor. So first I turn on the red strip lights so I can get around. I have split level house, babies. No one needs to be tripping on the stairs, right? It's not about making it unsafe or like we're not doing a total blackout darkness retreat, right? So we flip on those low reds.
Yeah.
Then I might light a candle on the tabletop, right? So that's like eye level or below. Amber light. You could also get amber lights. I love amber lights for that. And then when the sun comes up, I'm going outside. And I'm bringing any children that wake up, when they wake up, first thing is going outside. So then we're seeing the natural light programming. And then we might have like higher lamps. And then eventually, once the sun's fully up, the normal white overheads. And then same process in reverse in the evening. That once the sun is in the afternoon, like the UVB window's over, we're turning off the overheads. And then we have shoulder shoulder eye height amber lights. So we can still see, but it's just changing because we have receptors that tell the direction of the light as well as the color frequency, as well as the brightness. So one of the mistakes that I do see people make is they just screw in red light bulbs into the overhead light. So it's better because it is cutting out the frequency that stimulates, but too much bright light will still stimulate the cortisol, even if it doesn't have the blue, if it's really intense. So it needs to get dimmer. Ideally, it's changing direction. So maybe initially you wouldn't have 3 sets of lights, but eventually once you feel it, it just kind of feels natural. And especially if you have children, it's easier for them to go gradual. If you just suddenly shut off the lights, like the kids freak out because it feels scary. Like, ah! So yeah, going overhead, then you dim it, and then eventually end up with the red lights on the floor. And then eventually you shut those off when you're, fully going to bed.
That's brilliant. I appreciate the nuance that you've added to that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I also want to just appreciate the fact that you said 5 kids at home, and there's nothing more disruptive to sleep than children, particularly newborns. Like how are you? Yeah, let's talk about some of those like chief circadian disruptions to new mothers, and what have you done to avoid that? What have you done to preserve your sleep?
Yeah, this is a lovely question, and it's so cool when you learn about circadian biology, and we actually have different circadian modes that are possible. So the women in my practice, I'm coaching them through actually dropping into a circadian polyphasic sleep cycle. So this is not like a productivity sleep schedule. This is the biological natural thing that happens. So how that works is that when your body crosses over that magical number I shared earlier of 14 hours of darkness, beyond 14 hours of darkness, your body naturally shifts into a polyphasic sleep pattern, which means that you sleep for a few hours and then you wake up for a few hours and then you fall back asleep again for a few hours. And if you take that environment all the way to a dim around the clock, this is what happens to people when they're on long-term bed rest. Dim, round-the-clock environment, eventually sleep can actually break into 4 patterns around the clock. So then that's basically the rhythm that a baby's on, right? A baby sleeps for a couple hours, wakes up to nurse. They need to nurse about every 2 hours. So when the environment is controlled in this way, where if she was in her room and she only had the natural light coming through her window and candle light, that her body would naturally be able to fall asleep and wake up to care for her baby around the clock. That's why we used to have a traditional postpartum lie-in where they would tell women to stay in bed for the first month or longer to establish the breastfeeding relationship. And the other benefit of that is that it gets her into a circadian state where she is actually not experiencing any disruption at all, because this is one of the huge major misconceptions about the circadian rhythm is everyone thinks that it's sleep, and they think that sleep causes the circadian rhythm, when really the sleep is an effect of the circadian rhythm. The way that your environment is actually going to determine the quality of your sleep. So this is also like how the siesta works, is that in that same climate, right? If it's a summertime, then the sun's never going down. So you're like, wait, Nikko, you just said you need 10 hours of darkness, but the sun only goes down for 2 hours. What do I do? So historically, that would have been like 2 sleeps. They would sleep once around midnight and then once around noon. So there's all like sleep. And this is something that puzzles sleep research when they don't understand circadian health. There was just a paper that came out this last year where they were looking at people who lived in a pre-industrial kind of way. And they're like, our sleep is better. We have more sleep. Our sleep is consolidated, and they have really crummy sleep, but our circadian health markers are crap and their circadian health markers are good, because this whole idea of consolidated sleep is really just an artifact of 16 hours of artificial light a day. When you have 16 hours of light, then your body basically crashes and is like, oh, now I have to, sleep for 8 hours straight. But without artificial light, humans don't really sleep for that. We kind of take turns with sleep. We're social sleepers. And so there's usually someone standing watch. So this is another one of the areas where night shift could be massively transformed by understanding circadian biology in terms of how we schedule people, the kind of environment that they're in. and how we're all taking turns to rotate and care for our vulnerable, right? Like a lot of night shift jobs are the most important jobs, um, like emergency life saving surgeries,
Mm, mm.
or like labor. Labor often happens at night because of how the melatonin affects the uterus. There's all kinds of really important things happening at night. So it's not that night shift is bad or evil or wrong for human biology. It's that the light and keeping people up for these extended periods of time, that's unnatural. And then likewise with food and imported food, we have all kinds of other disruptive factors, leading to kind of these metabolic health crises where the light is telling people one thing, but then the food that they're eating is telling them another thing, but then the work schedule or school schedule that they have is putting another demand on it, where it's all kind of cascading. That at first it seems really complicated, but quantum health, when you understand light as a defining factor and our environmental connection as a defining factor, then it just simplifies everything, like getting back to the basics.
Mm. Would you then account for something like intermittent fasting or time restricted feeding into
Hmm.
this conversation around circadian health?
Oh, absolutely. Um, they're doing some really cool research right now, for night shift workers, and finding that they actually have fewer metabolic problems if they still have daytime eating, even though they're working night shift. Um, yeah. And then likewise, when you're looking at like ketogenic diets, they kind of change the way that electrons are flowing through the mitochondrial transport chain. There's all kinds of fascinating information and ideas out there that people are starting to play around with.
Yeah, yeah. This whole conversation is so multifactorial. I appreciate that your research and your institute is trying to account for all of it, keep
Hmm.
that bigger picture, and all those factors on the board. Let's talk about another shift that's about to happen to many of us. Daylight savings time is coming to an
Hmm.
end. What
That's
are
right.
your thoughts and your institute's perspective on that?
Yeah, it's a big shift. The fall one is not really that big of a problem. The fall one actually, in some cases, we see better health impacts because we're getting more time in the morning. Again, people are just flooding themselves with cortisol in the morning. And this is part of, like, if you look at the biochemical fingerprint of anxiety, which is just skyrocketing these days, it's when you wake up in the morning, turn on the artificial lights, brew the coffee, eat the sugar, are worrying about getting to somewhere on time. You haven't slept properly because you haven't gotten your full melatonin autophagy cycle. And so your cortisol just goes really, really, really high. And then normally cortisol would then like slowly decline across the rest of the day towards bedtime. But when people have all of this light, the light signal is not changing. So it continues to drive that high cortisol program. So in the springtime, when we do the spring forward, that really, really messes people up, because then that cortisol dump, that's the way most people start the morning, is happening earlier. And you know what, like you mentioned that you travel, so you know what jet lag feels like. And everyone in the jet lag community knows that the first thing you do is anchor to the light, like that you have to go outside. That's well known. Even from people who aren't living circadian day to day at home, they know that they have to get the real sunlight when they go to their new location. So it's basically daylight savings is jumping everyone in that way. And so if you think about jet lag symptoms, right, you feel clammy, like uncomfortable, heart feels racing, right? Appetite feels really crummy. Your digestive system is like, ugh. All of those kinds of things. That's basically what happens with daylight savings time. And it's not so bad if you gain an extra hour, then you can actually have a more relaxed morning, and it's kind of maybe even a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. Should we? Would you argue just to getting rid of it altogether, so we're
Oh,
not doing
definitely.
anything?
Yeah, we look forward to, because so the clock is a tool to help us communicate with other humans, right? To say we're both going to show up at this particular time, and this is how we know we're going to quantify that time. But our body clock runs on solar time, so it's fine. People would adjust more naturally to the season change if we didn't change clock time, right? Like people could decide to have like because a lot of places do anyways have summer hours, winter hours, right? Like I live in a tourist town, so half the businesses are going to close. They're going to shut down whole days and like way shorten the hours, because not only do we not have the tourists around, but we also, everyone's just going to slow down for that winter time. And that's just what we do naturally. We don't really need the clock to change in order to make our schedules work. The clock change is a very like artificial overlay on everything to make everyone do it all at once on a specific day. And like I said, it has, those negative circadian health impacts. It'd be better for everyone to manage that on their own.
And why have we not gotten rid of it?
That's beyond me.
It seems like most people are in support of just not having this at all, and yet it still remains in place. This artifact of, industrial revolution and productivity in the factory and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd love to see it change. It's been brought to legislation many times. My state voted to abolish it, and then they decided that they had to wait for the rest of our block of vertical states to get on with the program. So I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm waiting on California. Like, hey,
year,
California, I'm giving you stink eye. Like, this was supposed to be done years ago.
Yeah, no, every year around daylight savings time, there's conversation. You see conversation, and then it's like, well, we're just going to do this again, right? We're going to do this again next year. But I know we're going to be back talking about it, and nothing moves. But hopefully, it does. Nikko, on this podcast, in the terrain theory space, we are committing to exploring how the body's internal terrain influences health outcomes. I think Mike and I have expanded that definition of terrain to be like mind, body, spirit. But from the quantum biology vantage point, how do you view the concept of terrain? How can we incorporate the idea of the quantum into the terrain?
Yeah, this is such a lovely question, and why I was excited to come on this podcast with you all, because when we get to we're looking at the quantum field. We're looking at everything that we're made of, right? So in a classical view, we think of we're carbon-based life forms, right? We're all about the different molecules, right? So like there's oxygen and there's hydrogen and carbon and you need a lot of iron, and like all of these, everything is very discrete and defined. But when you get to the quantum level, we're looking at iron and oxygen are both made of neutrons and protons in the nucleus and electrons around it, right? So we're looking at the essential substance of you, me, the desk, like everything at the atomic level. At the atomic level, they're different, but at the subatomic level, they're the same, right? So terrain really expands. When looking at health, a lot of the times, like you've probably seen people in the quantum space, I think Jack Kruse says something like redox before detox. And when looking at energy flow, the way that the molecules are vibrating is going to determine their properties. And so energy flowing from one system, one part of the system, right? Like if I am like, I'm sitting here and I'm like next to my computer, we're doing this podcast, there's like electricity and I'm picking up this charge. What I'm going to do afterwards is I'm going to take off my shoes. I'm going to go ground. That positive charge is going to then go into the ground. But like, was that charge part of me? Is it now part of the ground? Or, you know what I mean? Like that separation between the body and what is the body. Like a lot of people are also working in the biophoton space, and they're looking at, we have these clouds, or like, if you look at the heart, like the heart has this huge magnetic field. Like, is that magnetic field part of your biology? When we're looking at how quantum research is going to transform medicine, we're potentially able to diagnose problems before they fully manifest into diseases by measuring things like the membrane potential, which is, again, this electric charge. We're supposed to have a net negative charge. So if that charge is decreased, the cell has less ability to do work, less ability to heal itself, less ability to like keep integrity, right? So it's a lot closer to field theory, I think, a lot closer to understanding everything as connection. And that's part of where quantum got a lot of pushback early on. Like Einstein hated quantum theory. Like he was ragging on it, writing essays on it, fighting, like he wanted to do everything in his power to stop quantum theory from going forward. Because some of the first experiments were done with entanglement, which is what he called spooky action at a distance. So some people love that idea that everything's connected and it doesn't matter the distance between, like they still could be impacting each other. And other people hate that idea. So yeah, it's definitely the case that when looking at like what is terrain, what is the body made of, and how is it interacting with its environment, and what makes it be more vulnerable and closer, like going faster towards death and dissolution and entropy, versus what's keeping it whole and integral. I think that you have to look at energy flows. And so if you're looking at energy flows, then you have to be looking at the connection with the environment itself as potentially coming into your system, right? Does that...
Yeah, it does. It really does start to answer that question, or at least introduce another factor or another aspect to this definition, this evolving definition of terrain. And it's interesting because when you look at the chemistry, the biology, the atomic aspect, it gets criticized for being separatist. But when you get into the quantum, you drill down far enough to realize that it isn't separatist. If anything, it's just connectedness.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're saying, that there almost is no distinguishing between me and this wall right here and the air I'm breathing and the light that I'm taking in. Honestly, it's just all a continuum and an endless transfer of energy. It's not waste. It's whatever my body doesn't need, this organelle doesn't need, something else is going to provide life, some important aspect or function of life to something else in my environment, of which I am a part and not separate.
Right. Yeah. It's all there. And yeah, there's a lot of interesting ideas because a lot of people don't like the more woo elements. And they don't, I think when they hear people talking, they just think like, oh, you're just saying coherence. You're just saying, these things. And they don't realize that there's actually science behind it. Like for an example that I like to share, we look at mitochondrial density. So of course, mitochondria are a huge way that our body is processing energy, is processing these electrons, these subatomic particles, right? So mitochondrial density in cells is a measure you can take, right? You get a cell, put it in a slide, and like have a computer or something count how many mitochondria are in there. And one person and the next may have different amount of mitochondrial density. And it turns out that actually overlays on the big five personality. And this is one of the reasons that I love working in the quantum world, is that when you have higher mitochondrial density, higher energy capacity, you see that these people tend to score higher on all of the positive personality traits. They tend to be more outgoing, lower neuroticism, that kind of thing. So you see, that's part of what I was talking about the outsize effects. And people that they start correcting their light environment and suddenly they have huge, profound transformations in areas of their life that we might say are like consciousness or the way that they're perceiving reality as a whole. Having major spiritual connections, or healing, major health conditions that they weren't trying to target necessarily. And a lot of people think that the human egg has the most mitochondrial density. But when you look at like by volume, a nerve, like if you think of like a nerve starting in the brain going all the way down to your toe, right, that's a really, really long cell. And all over it has to have mitochondria to power it. There's mitochondria in the nerve. So there we're looking at like, a million mitochondria in one cell that are processing energy, that are absorbing, like mitochondria when you hit them with infrared light, which sunlight always has infrared. Firelight has infrared. You hit that mitochondria with infrared light and it suddenly starts working more efficient. Same thing, if you're grounded outside, mitochondria work more efficiently. And as I was telling you earlier, that picture that they were able to take of the electron tunneling, like what that's saying is that the electrons are moving through barriers that by classical physics, the electron shouldn't be able to penetrate, but it passes through as though it's nothing. So that's a quantum effect, right? The energy running through. So we have millions of mitochondria in our body having this quantum effect. But if you even slightly stretch that out, it becomes more, it's harder for the mitochondria to make that jump. So what happens when your body gets stressed out is it swells, right? We know of like inflammation. So even a slight change in the shape of the mitochondria can suddenly make it start leaking light. So that's where you see like biophoton release can be a marker of aging and cells not working as efficiently because it's spilling rather than tunneling through efficiently, right? So if you think that sitting by a fire could nourish your mitochondria, help your body build more mitochondria, and that would actually change your outlook on life and make you more open to new experiences, right? Make you feel less neurotic about the problems that you face, just by sitting next to a fire or going and sitting out in the sun, right? Or like if you have to, you're like stuck in an apartment, you're paralyzed or like healing from a horrible surgery, you have a red light panel. That red light panel is giving frequency that the fluorescent overheads that you're under are not, right? The fluorescents and a lot of LEDs, what's happened is they've cut the infrared frequencies, which the infrared frequencies very specifically work with our body and our biology to make mitochondria more efficient, to produce more of that cellular water, to produce more ATP, to produce more hormones, right? Like mitochondria aren't only doing energy, they're also creating hormones. So you can see how it gets really, really big from something that is really basic. Like we know that it feels really good to sit next to a fire. Like you could bring someone from thousands of years ago and be like, hey, you want to sit by the fire? They'd be like, heck yeah.
Amen.
On the thread of harmonizing technology, which I
Mm-hmm.
love, where are you at with like geometry, sacred geometry, biogeometry? Because and in what ways would that or would that not mimic nature?
Oh, that's a good question. That's another one. I definitely would recommend chatting with my colleague Carrie B. She gets into a lot of these things, but Sarah Pugh is another one of our faculty members, and I was just on a call with her this morning, and she does a lot of work with how our metabolism changes depending on our emotional state. So she's saying one of the examples she gave was like, at this point, I think most everyone knows that Teflon is like a horrible substance and that when we cook our food in Teflon, it makes, makes our cells clog up. It's really bad. She's saying, yeah, definitely you shouldn't have Teflon cookware in your home. But what do you do when you go to the Airbnb and all the stores are closed and you want to make food and like you have this, like, she's like, just cook with the Teflon and be happy. And like, you're going to get back to your system, but like you live your life, you have to be whole. And so I think a lot of the sacred geometry things that help us feel emotionally more whole make our body be able to do things that it can't do when we're in a crummy state.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I mean, there's research. What I mean, it was like the milkshake study that was reading
Oh,
about
tell
that.
me about that.
They got two groups to consume the exact same milkshake. They told one group that it was really fatty and sugary and not good for you, and then the other group that it was a very healthy milkshake with like a protein. And they measured a specific hormone that triggers hunger.
Mm-hmm.
And the two groups showed different levels of that hormone. The one group that thought it was a very fatty, filling milkshake actually scored higher on that hormone, or the less on that hormone that triggered hunger, whereas the other one was a lot higher. And so,
Mm-hmm.
just showing that the belief in what you're eating can have a real physiological effect, and that's just one of them. That's just a specific hormone that triggers hunger.
Yeah,
Imagine what else that can do. That was the saying, a happy donut beats a sad salad.
absolutely. Yep. That's definitely the factor. And one of our other faculty members, Dr. Leland Stillman, he talks a lot about the placebo and nocebo effects and saying that as a practitioner, if you know about this, then you should be actively trying to trigger the placebo effect in your patients, because
Absolutely.
like we don't need an objective here. Like if this is real, then we should use it.
Absolutely. I mean, that should be the practitioners unto themselves, right? There should be an entire subset of practitioners that are just placebo practitioners. We're gonna get you to believe in whatever it is we're giving. This glass of water is gonna heal you.
Mm-hmm.
This is magic water. Drink
Yeah.
it and it will
Yeah.
heal you. That's
Well,
it.
and we see that it does. Another thing too is like I read one recently that was about neighborhood green spaces, and they found that proximity to neighborhood green spaces could, and blue spaces as well, natural bodies of water, could actually predict preterm birth and like low gestational weight babies by that, and that living closer to areas that are objectively more beautiful, then like the babies gestate in a way that's more healthy and just less prone to risk factors for complications.
Yeah, more green spaces and blue spaces.
Mm-hmm.
No
Absolutely.
argument. No argument here. Nikko, this has been an incredible conversation, and it took some turns and some twists that I was not expecting, delightful ones. But we have taken enough of your time. I know you've got a baby that could be, in your arms at any second. So we wanted to beat the baby to
Okay.
the end of this podcast. So we gotta ask you the question that we ask all of our guests, Nikko, and that is,
Mm-hmm.
what are your non-negotiables, the daily habits that you do to tend to your terrain?
Yeah, everything to stabilize circadian health is definitely one of the things that for the daily choices that I make. I'm looking to have my light environment be telling my body that day is day and night is night. And so I anchor that with as best as I can, depending on what I'm doing, with getting outside for some daylight, connecting with nature for some earthing, um, eating a warm meal every day, at least one good solid warm meal. Those are really, really important things. It's all too easy as a mother to spend all day cooking and cleaning for everyone else and living off of snacks. I know a lot of women that end up in that particular state where they, eat a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And I've found that I just can't get by that way. I need to make sure that I have enough time that I can go outside for a while, to just be and to absorb those photons, and that I need to anchor with a good solid meal, and I need to have a dark night. I would say the dark night is the number one above everything else, is that I found that I really have to temper my light at sunset. In order to be the happy, healthy, productive, available mother that I want to be. So those are the things that really make a big difference in my day to day, that have transformed my health and energy, and that I've seen be so effective. So in terms of role modeling for my children, that those things really make a big difference.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Nikko, what are some of your go-to book recommendations for the listener who wants to learn more about what we talked about?
Okay. Yeah. Books. That's a good one. We're hoping that there's going to be more books. I'm working on one. A lot of my colleagues were working on books to get them out behind the scenes. I'll be doing one that's about pregnancy. Um, a lot of the books will show just a part of the picture. So, where we're working at the Institute of Applied Quantum Biology is a very interdisciplinary, cutting edge space. And a lot of what we're doing is coming straight out of academia that hasn't been translated into books. And one of the funny things that happened in the call that I was talking about this morning, I was on with Sarah Pugh, and someone was asking her about one of the books, and she's like, "Oh, well, that's an old book, isn't it?" And the person looked at it and they're like, "It was published in 2017." She's like, "Yeah, that was like 9 years ago." Because a lot of the space that we're working in, we're really trying to bridge the translational gap, because it takes so long. Like, it's an average of 17 years to go from we've made a scientific discovery to doctors today know about it and practice it. And we're reading papers that are coming out like 2025, right? We're reading what's happening exactly right now, and we're training our practitioners to use that. So a lot of the books and things, like, there are really foundational works. We have a whole citation, like a really long bibliography of the recommended books, and there are like 30 books that you could read. But in terms of any one book that puts all the pieces together, it doesn't quite exist yet, unfortunately. But yeah, so a lot of us are doing publishing through like blogs. Like I have my Substack, Brighter Days, Darker Nights, that has, a huge archive where I've put together the pieces. There are lots of circadian health books. So yeah, I mean, you can go into books,
Anyone?
but like I said, it's slow. We're fast.
Yeah,
We're fast and nimble, and paperback publishing. We'd love for it to be in paper because then you could read it offline.
yeah.
Um, but we're also so much pushing this front edge of what's happening.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying. There's no one book out there yet that really encompasses all of what you're trying to do as an interdisciplinary institute. But
Mm-hmm.
any titles that come to mind, and they don't necessarily have to be about circadian health, just, your
Oh,
book
sure. Oh, I
recommendations.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I do have lots of favorite books. In quantum biology, one came out that's I think it's called the Coming Age of Quantum Biology, and it's through the Guy Foundation, and it's good in terms of especially what you guys were kind of interested in, the technology and what's going to happen with technology there. That's a good one for understanding some of the like types of devices and things that are being examined and thought about. Um, when it comes, yeah. And then so I'm a not only am I mom of five but also a homeschooling mom, so I am spending so much time in classic children's literature right now that's like my whole space. We are doing a bunch of deep dives into just like the classics of history. So like we have The Once and Future King on the shelf right now, Sword in the Stone. We're going to be going through the Narnia series soon because my children haven't read that yet. We are, and Winnie the Pooh, we're doing like the entire Beatrix Potter. We're like so much in, for me personally right now, I'm so much involved in my children's lives. And then, like I said, like these hard science research spreads. So it's kind of like a wild, um, diverse thing. Martin Moore Ead's book also comes to mind as one that could be good for people who want like to understand the technology of light. It's what's it his even called? But yeah, his name is Dr. Martin Moore Ead. And he has a Substack as well where we're peers on there. Um, so his is one you can get in hand. And then, yeah, I have a whole load of resources for women who are like going through their birthing years because there's a lot of things about the way that birth is approached. So that's another area that I have a whole library that I could, that, maybe might not be interesting to you all, but that other folks. And I'm always happy for people to reach out to if they're like, this is the topic. Like, what topic do you want to learn about? I could probably come up with a resource for you.
Yeah. No, this is it's a great list. I was thinking about Narnia, isn't it the lamppost, right? When they emerge into
Hmm.
Narnia, right? I wonder what light bulb was in that lamppost. Probably an amber one.
Right. Yeah. It was probably amber or maybe one of those old tungsten flame.
Oh, tungsten flames. Yeah. Bring them back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Flame lights. Yeah. They're awesome. And then likewise, yeah, when we get into the whole realm of like EMF mitigation,
Mm.
that and all of that, there's a whole lot of interesting things. Like we could go on and on. And I do. We have lots of things, and yeah, we're so interested in getting all of this out there and into the hands of people so that they can do it, because it literally changes the epigenetic profile. It changes the way genes are firing. And so for my work with women and like their babies, like when you're setting the foundation, you really want all of that to be just right, and for the energy to be flowing cleanly through the system so that DNA can flow right, so that redox, so that baby's not having that oxidative stress bilirubin cycle, right? There's so many um, practical applications. And that's one of the most beautiful things too, like in terms of like, books give us information. But we also can download information from nature. So it's like you could read a book or you could just go lay in the sun. Like we all consume a lot of information and a lot of ideas. And if you just kind of go out and grok the sun for a while, I know a lot of us have had insights. Like when I went to shift in this direction, like I used to work in marketing, business consulting, web design for like 10 years while I was in school. And eventually I was out sitting having a sunshine meditation, and it was just like an immediate download through the light into my body, into my brain, my consciousness. I didn't know exactly what it was going to be, but I knew that the change was there. And I've heard from a lot of other people too that they've had their major downloads while getting the direct rays from the sun.
That is remarkable. Nikko, where can the listener learn more about you and your work?
So I'm the director of research at the Institute of Applied Quantum Biology. So you can definitely come there. We have a certification program for practitioners, and I'm in there helping guide everyone through that program and helping them define their niche in the field of quantum biology and figuring out where quantum biology intersects with their work. Not only do we have practitioners, we have a lot of like doctors in healthcare, but we're starting to have more and more people who are in interior design or architecture, technology development, like other people who need this foundational knowledge to be able to inform their work going forward. For those who are family oriented, you can also find me at Brighter Days, Darker Nights, or my website, nikkokennedy.com. Kind of will send you in all those directions as well.
Got it. We'll put the links in the show notes. Nikko Kennedy, thank you so much for joining us on Terrain Theory Podcast. It's been illuminating.
Great. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Mike.